is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it? I'm the Doctor. Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
Small off-duty Czechoslovakian traffic warden.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Alright dudes, it's time for another episode of It's Time to Rewind. I am known as Bubbawheat. Not the Bubbawheat, not first name Bubba, last name Wheat, just Bubbawheat. This season is Red Who, where I'm covering British sci-fi like Red Dwarf and Doctor Who, and joining me 3 million years in the future via the TARDIS is my guest, Paul Hawkins. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on this particular season. I am a big fan of Red Dwarf and Doctor Who, so it's always a joy talking about either, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, this season has already been a lot of fun, even though I've pretty much completed all the classic Doctor Who, and I'm getting ready to kick off into New Who next week. But this week we were still talking about Red Dwarf, and specifically we were talking about Ouroboros, or Ouroboros, as they pronounce it. The third episode of Series 7 of Red Dwarf, originally released on January 31st, 1997. And this is kind of a transition point for a lot of fans of Red Dwarf. I feel like there's not necessarily two camps, but for fans of Red Dwarf, there's a lot of people there's like two eras of Red Dwarf. There's series 1 through 6, and then there's, maybe even 3. There's like series 7 and 8, and then 9 and onwards.
Yeah, I would say when it comes to the fans of Red Dwarf, you've got the people that believe that 1 through 4 is great, and then the rest you can take or leave. You got the people that believe that after series 6 it starts going downhill, and then you've got people that just kind of enjoy watching the show and have enjoyed how it sort of evolved past series 6, because it definitely evolved into something slightly different after that. So yeah, I find myself in the latter of those three. Just because I've always enjoyed, anytime we get more Red Dwarf, I've enjoyed watching it. So, I'm definitely excited to talk about this episode.
Yeah, well, before we jump into this episode, I know you already said that you're a big fan of Red Dwarf as a whole, but where did you get started? Like, what's your history with Red Dwarf?
So I'm not sure I can give you, an exact date and time as to when I got into Red Dwarf. However, I do know that by the time I was about 8, I had been introduced to it. Most likely it was just on TV late at night, and I happened to have watched it. And I ended up watching it on TV. I used to have some VHS tapes that were the Smeg-Ups, which for anyone who is not initiated into Red Dwarf, the Smeg-Ups were the videos that they put out that had a bunch of outtakes and alternate takes and little interstitials that they created for it that they would release. They only released 2 of them, but if you have the DVDs, you can find them all on there, just without the extra interstitial things that they made specifically for those tapes. And then when I was about, I think 13, somewhere around there, my brother's godfather took me to the Dimension Jump convention. I think it was in Leeds, and I got to meet several of the cast, had my picture taken with a Scudder and everything. So yeah, it's been quite fun growing up with that, and then they obviously stopped for a while, and then they came back, and I got to witness the joy of the fandom that they were coming back, and then the fracture of the fandom for the Back to Earth special. Because it was very much either, oh cool, more Red Dwarf, or oh my goodness, what have they done? And that there was no in between. And then obviously past then they've come back and made more series, and I think the people that didn't like Back to Earth were less hateful towards the newer Red Dwarf, but I kind of just avoided the internet fandom at that point and just sort of enjoyed the show. So, yeah, that's kind of been my history with it. What about yours?
Well, I've kind of talked about mine throughout this series, but just briefly, I kind of discovered a few random episodes on PBS. Like it was never destination television, but anytime I would happen to catch it, I would just be like glued to the TV set. And then whenever the DVDs came out, I started collecting the DVDs, and I have the first 5 series on DVD.
Okay. Yeah, I know that they specifically created a bunch of little promos that they would use when airing on PBS. Like it was, I think it was around Series 6, so you still had, Lister, Rimmer, Cat, and Crichton, and they would, they'd be in Starbug and would be sort of being like, oh, something's coming up on the scanner, and it's another PBS, blah blah blah. Like and I think that's on one of the DVDs if you end up getting that one. I think it's one of the later ones, but yeah, I knew that it had aired on PBS. I'm glad you ended up running into it.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I went through the series start to finish last fall, and that was a lot of fun too. And everything from Series 8 and on was brand new to me during that watch. But yeah, the Series 7 and this episode is a really interesting one, because this is a big change in the series, which I had forgotten. I remembered that this was the episode where it kind of reminds me of Futurama, where in Futurama Fry is his own grandfather, and here in Red Dwarf we find out that Lister is his own father.
Yep. Yeah, and this predates that episode of Futurama by a little bit. So yeah. This one got here first.
About 2 years. I think a little bit more than that, because I don't think that's. I don't remember if Fry being his own grandfather was in this first series.
Yeah, season 3, if my memory holds for that one. So yeah, definitely a few years for this one. Although I will say that the canon changes, and I'm sure we'll talk about the specifics in a minute, but the canon actually changes before this episode, but it's very subtle. It's this episode that there's a direct, like, oh, if you weren't paying any attention, we've just changed the history now for this. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to get into it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess, I haven't done this too much, but because Series 7, there's so many changes, I want to get into a little bit, because this is the series where Chris Berry was trying to leave the show. And so in the previous episode is where he basically becomes the new Ace Rimmer and goes off into other dimensions. And this is the first episode where he's not a part of the crew anymore, and it's just the 3 of them, and he just appears in technically it's not even Rimmer, it's alternate universe Rimmer in a flashback.
Yeah, it is interesting to think, because the only time you see him after the prior episode is in an alternate universe flashback, or a dream that Lister has in a later episode as well.
Or what was it? It's like the
the virtual reality thing that
The ride, Rimmer the Ride.
Yep. Yeah, I still have that song stuck in my head from time to time. But yeah, it's do you know the reason why Chris Barry wanted to leave the show?
I didn't look it up today, but I believe it was because he was like in another show, and he thought that was taking off.
Well, he had been in that show for a while as well at this point. So he was basically making seasons of Red Dwarf and seasons of the British Empire, and he was playing a wholly unlikable character in both. But both of the characters firmly believe that they're doing the right thing and for good reasons. So he's very typecast for that, and so he wanted to get away from that, which is why he decided to step away from Red Dwarf for Series 7. Probably didn't take. He ended up coming back, but yeah, so there was definitely a shift for this season after that happened.
Yeah, and this is the episode where they discover the yet another wibbly time thingy that's not a white hole, but instead it's a rift in time that opens up a time gate, I think they call it, to an alternate dimension, and in that dimension, Kachansky is the last human on Earth, or last human alive, and Lister is the hologram, and we get a flashback that shows how it was that Kachansky was the one that was put into stasis, and after Lister gets back from leave and is hiding, his smuggled cat Frankenstein in his jacket, it was right after him and Kachansky had broken up, and she takes the cat and is about to disintegrate it, but then takes pity and saves the cat herself. So she's the one that gets put into stasis for hiding the cat.
Yep, and this is the point where anyone attempting to follow the canon of the show, if they haven't already given up, just raise the white flag in surrender, because anyone that has been following the show from the beginning knows that in the first series of Red Dwarf and most episodes past that, Lister was never in a relationship with Kachansky. He wanted to be in a relationship with Kachansky, but he was never able to actually ask her. And and then she died, and then you find out in several other episodes, one of which you may have covered in this season so far, that at some point in the future they will end up getting together, but that was the original actress for Kachansky. And then in, I think it's Series 5. I can't remember if it's Series 5 or Series 6. Might be the first episode of 6, thinking about it now. When Lister is waking up from a deep sleep and Crichton is reminding him of who he is, he mentions that he was once in a relationship with Kachansky and wants to get her back, which was just kind of like that's kind of not true. And then this episode really hammered home, no, they were in a relationship and then she broke up with him and all of this stuff. It's no, they really are. That wasn't just Crichton trying to be like, you used to have a relationship and now you don't, and be nice with Lister. That's actually what the show is going for at this point in time.
Yeah, I do remember looking up the trivia about that, and they actually did. I believe they commented on it, and they said that the reason that they made that change was because they thought that it wouldn't make sense for him to be pining so much over someone that he had a crush on 3 million years ago, and it made more sense if it was someone that he had a brief relationship with. And so that was part of the reason why they made that change to the show canon. But at the same time, I've actually covered, 2 episodes that theoretically could be considered not so much retcons, but things that alter the reality of the crew members and could involve changing their pasts, like the white hole episode, because that ends with that section of their timeline being erased and then going back to a slightly altered timeline. And also I just had it in my head. Now I have to look it up.
While you're looking up the other thing, there is actually an episode of the series, and I believe again it's in series 6, that breaks the rules that are established in Whitehall, because Lister remembers playing pool with planets in that episode. It's the Demons and Angels episode. He eats an edible pot noodle. It's supposed to be this thing that in his entire life he's done amazing things, but he never thought he'd eat an edible pot noodle. And he mentions that he played pool with planets.
Yeah.
You don't remember that, Lister. That's not something you should know about. But obviously it's a fun.
Yeah, I had to look it up, but it was Out of Time that I covered 2 weeks ago. That was the one where they meet their future selves, and their future selves destroy their present selves, but that creates a time paradox, and because they kill their own past selves, then the future selves don't exist, and so that messes with the timeline as well.
Yeah, and there's a fantastic opening to series 7 where Lister is explaining all of that to his camera and therefore to the audience, and then the camera just explodes because it can't handle the paradox that he's talking about. It's a great moment, and anyone that's been enjoying these episodes, and you haven't already, I do recommend you check out Ticket to Ride in Series 7 as well, because that's another fun one that involves time travel that does some cool things and has some good jokes with history there.
Yeah, and that Ticket to Ride, it does tend to be like, a top 5 or top 10 episodes of all time for Red Dwarf.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a very well made episode, very well done.
Yeah, and so this is the episode that introduces the alternate reality Kachansky, who's now played by Chloe Annette. So what do you think about Chloe Annette, like in this episode, but also in general, her addition to the cast for the next 2 series?
So I thought that she was a needed addition to the cast when I, trying to remember watching it for the first time, because obviously throughout the entire series, with the exception of when Holly is female, there is no sort of female main cast member. So there really isn't a sort of, a woman's perspective or a female character just on screen for the vast majority of the show. So, number one, finally, they've actually put another female on the screen. But also, it was a very good choice to have this character who, even though we only saw just a smidgen of her at the very beginning of the first episode of the first season, you could kind of tell she was a little mid to upper class type person. Quite.
She's also someone that's competent.
Someone that actually knows what they're doing, which obviously the vast majority of the comedy comes from just how much these guys are terrible at what they do, but they're doing it because they have to.
Although I've said several times throughout this season that Lister is actually he's pretty competent himself. He just doesn't have the ambition or the drive. Like he only does things whenever he has to, and not because he wants to, because he never wants to. But anytime he is required to do something that requires knowledge, especially like engineering knowledge, he actually accomplishes it, reasonably well. Like not to a high standard, but he does accomplish things effectively. Like, he's the one that repaired Crichton, and
Yeah.
the only real issue is that his personality changed, and that's just to explain why it was a different actor.
Yeah, and it is something that it's worth noting. He is a technician. Like, even though he was, as he said in episode 1, like in series 1, I can't remember which episode, but yeah, he is, out of 169 people on the ship, he ranks 169. Like, even though there's actually, according to later seasons, over 1,000 people on the ship, which makes sense given how big the damn thing was. But
that was another change where they kind of looked at the science of it, and they're like, it doesn't make sense for there to only be 169 people on this massive ship.
On a ship 3 miles long. Yeah, no,
it's like a ship. I don't remember. I want to say it's like 10 times or 100 times the size of the Starship Enterprise.
Yeah, no, that's it. They mentioned at one point in it, like, it genuinely is a 3-mile long ship, and it has multiple decks. So like
it's basically the size of Manhattan. Yeah,
it's just a massive ship, and the idea that only 169 people would be needed to run it is absurd. And obviously they didn't worry about it too much when they initially wrote it, because they didn't need to. It was the first space sitcom that had ever really existed at that time. It was something they were like, we'll go for it and see what happens. And then they definitely realized they needed more.
Even these days, I want to say that the number of sci-fi comedies, sci-fi comedy TV shows, is still in the single digits, or if it's in the double digits, it's only just barely.
Yeah, and most of those are, English or have predominantly English people in them.
I think the one exception these days is, there's a couple recent ones. The Seth MacFarlane one, which I think that one is even kind of. I've heard that in later seasons,
the Orville,
it's kind
I
of
think.
The Orville, that it's become a bit more of a dramedy than a comedy.
My understanding of the Orville is it is like the 4th best Star Trek show, just because of how faithful it is to that sort of to that stuff. Yeah, that's and then I know Avenue 5 was it? Is it Avenue 5? I might be misremembering the name. It was something 5, but that has Hugh Laurie as as the captain of the ship. So again, they got a lead British actor in that one. That's going to bother me now if I can't remember the name of it. It probably is Avenue 5, but this is something that I hate about myself. But once I should know something, it is Avenue 5. Yes, okay. Sorry about that. Feel free to cut all of that. But anyway, yes. It is something that's very very few and far between. Even though Red Dwarf shows if you just make it genuinely funny and make the cast have actual chemistry, it'll work. Do it for God's sakes. I don't know why there aren't more.
Yeah, and it helps I think it does help if your sci-fi concepts are sound too. They don't necessarily have to be, but I think it works better. And Red Dwarf surprisingly does have a lot of sound concepts. So, although I do think that this one is not one of those. where
Yeah.
I think it would be nearly impossible for Lister to be in his own father.
I'm given that they've established that time travel exists, I think it would be possible for him to be his own father. However, my question at the end of the episode did become, did the alternate Lister have the same backstory? Because if he did, then who the hell is his father? Because obviously this Lister is his own father, but the other Lister, given the nature of circumstances at that point in time, could not be his own father. So yeah, he must have actually had an actual father outside of himself. So, but yeah, no, it's definitely something that And again, at the beginning of the episode, you mentioned that it's Ouroboros because the idea is he was left in a box at the Eggman's Arms with two names that they couldn't decide on. It was Rob or Ross. And then you immediately think about the fact that, hang on, his name is Dave. Like, they didn't even go with either of the names that they thought it might be. So, yeah, I don't know. Obviously, they couldn't be our Dave or Ross. Like, yeah, that doesn't work. That's not what the name of the symbol is. But yeah, it was an interesting thing when I first saw it. I was like, but neither of those are his name. So what happened there?
Yeah, and I also think it's kind of funny. Like in the trivia, somebody pointed out the fact that there is kind of a Red Dwarf connection between or Rob or Ross, because the Crichton was played by David Ross and then Robert Llewellyn, so he was played by both a Rob and a Ross.
Yep. Yeah, it is interesting. I did always, and random tangent, but obviously we got way more Robert Llewellyn as Crichton, but just taking season 2 Crichton and the first episode of season 3 Crichton, which Crichton would you have preferred to see going forward?
I mean, it's tough to say, because I do like the David Ross Crichton, but I'm not sure if that Crichton would have held up across several episodes. I mean, if whether or not he reverted to his original programming, or if he came back with the rebel without a cause attitude, which that would be a very different show.
Yeah, I did wonder as well if, like, every season Crichton would have some kind of like major accident, and then they'd need to rebuild him, and he would be a different actor every single season. I'm glad they didn't, because I love Robert Llewellyn. He's great in it, but yeah, I think that would have been fascinating to see. And of course, we got to see a potential Crichton as well. It would have been a golden Crichton.
Even though he doesn't really, neither alternate Crichton nor alternate Cat really get very many lines in this episode. They just kind of exist.
Yeah, they are just sort of there for the most part. I do think, I'm trying to remember because it's been a long time since I've seen it, there is sort of an extended version of this where I think they did have more lines. But yeah, I think it is very much cut down to time, because the reason this episode doesn't have any opening credits is because it was running long anyway.
Yeah, so that reminds me they would do that a lot on The Simpsons, where they wouldn't completely get rid of the opening titles, but if an episode ran long, they would definitely shorten the opening titles.
Yeah, Yeah, you could tell if there was going to be a fair bit in the episode based on how long the credits were, or the titles were for that episode.
And one other thing, I feel like we've kind of been talking around the episode a lot without talking about the episode.
Yeah.
But I do want to talk about, just I think the best part of this episode is the whole setup that we get before we meet the alternate reality with the whole Dave is just grooming himself with the tongs pulling out his nose hairs.
Yeah, kitchen tongs.
Yeah, kitchen tongs. And then his tooth cap falls out, and then he has the dental glue where he glues the dental floss into his teeth, and he's wearing the night, the dressing gown that Crichton finds. It's he says, I'll definitely have to take the frill off and obviously dye it, and he's wearing the slippers, the pink slippers.
Yeah, and nice fluffy slippers.
Yeah, and as he's going to meet Kochanski, like he just tosses the dental floss box over his shoulder, kind of like he's pushing his hair behind his shoulder.
Yeah, and I'm willing to bet you that they did that a few times, and that was probably the only take where it actually landed behind his ear. Cause I don't know if you noticed, but like he throws it, and then as he leaves, and you can see it's actually held behind his ear after he threw it. And yeah, when it comes to the glue that they use, Crichton says it'll take me a while to get some dental adhesive. He's like, no, give me some wood glue, which obviously is then needed later because it has to be a strong glue in there. It has to be stuck in there tight for a later scene.
Yeah, and I just love that, he looks like that when meeting Kochanski. Is, even though it's an alternate reality, but his, at this point, it's his long lost love. And this is before we, if you're watching it the first time, you don't realize that she's going to be a series regular after this. But, it's him meeting Kochanski again.
Yeah. And of course, it's the comedy of he's looking the worst he could possibly look outside of, again, jumping back, the one episode where he basically has space mumps and his head is giant. He is definitely not looking as suave as he would like. Not that you could ever necessarily call Dave Lister suave, but he would like to be, damn it.
Yeah. And we also get the callback to the earlier episode with his Gelf wife, too.
Yeah. Yeah, and the fun thing as well, if you know any of the extra stuff from Red Dwarf, any of the extra things they did, and they showed on the DVD, but it also aired on TV back then. The chief that marries Dave to his Gelf wife is played by a famous English chef called Ainsley Harriott, and then I believe it was either for this season or for the previous season. He used to host a TV show in England called Can't Cook, Won't Cook, and he would get people that were terrible at cooking, and the idea was who would become the best at cooking. So they did a special episode that was called Can't Smeg, Won't Smeg, and it was Dave Lister, Crichton, Rimmer, and Kat, who then turns into Dwayne Dibley. And so they did an episode of that. So yeah, the Gelf entire plot line, it's something that you never expect to come back after that episode. Those things don't come back in this show, and then all of a sudden this one does.
Yeah, Red Dwarf tends to be a proper sitcom where anything that happens in the episode, it resets back to normal by the end. And this, I feel like this series in general is one of the exceptions to the rule, even though at the end of the series they do, they do a full reset, where they bring the entire crew back to life with the nanobots.
Yeah, and that's that was again, like watching that for the first time. That was like oh crap, yeah, it's just going back to basics with this one. Okay, but yeah, no, this coming back to this episode, I mean, I'm glad that when they were asking Kat what the weird with a capital W thing was, and it being either a wibbly thing or a swirly thing. At least it was a wibbly thing, it was one of those two things. It wasn't something else when we finally got to see it, the tear in space-time. And again, that is something that the show really does hand wave as like, we're going to say what it is, and then we're going to accept it, and we're going to move on. Like, that's just kind of like the thing. It's like, oh, there was a surge in power that made this tear in space-time, and then somehow the scanners in Starbug are designed to be able to tell what this thing is. And exactly the same as once they hit it, they're like, oh, I'm picking up some kind of subspace disturbance down in CDEX. It's like, how are you picking that up exactly? It's like, which sensor in Starbug is the subspace sensor? Because I want to see what you're looking at there.
Yeah, I also kind of feel like in this series, they at times forgets that they're on Starbug and not on Red Dwarf, and I think even I forget that they're just on Starbug and they're not on Red Dwarf, because again, like going back to the scene where Crichton comes back with some clothes, it's like, where did he find those clothes? It's not like, on Red Dwarf that would make sense that he would find clothes anywhere because it's a massive ship, but they've been on Starbug for a very long time at this point. Like, where did he find those clothes? Because I maybe I'm just misremembering, and he said that he found them from a derelict, but I thought that he implied that he found them on Starbug.
He said that he found them in an old storage locker, and the only thing I can think of is, again, it's one of the things that happened with the paradox at the end of Series 6, and they mentioned at the beginning of this series that the dimensions of Starbug have changed significantly, and it's a lot bigger now. Not that we see really any other areas.
It becomes a TARDIS
outside of that episode.
Yeah, it becomes a TARDIS after that. So it still looks the exact same on the outside, but apparently it's bigger on the inside.
Yeah, I mean, there's an entire sort of like an air cooling chamber or something that they climb down into in that episode, and it's like, where is that on Star? Could you point to that on a map, please? I want to know where that is. But that's an exercise in futility when it comes to Red Dwarf, because it's one of those shows that the science is there for the most part, and then they just push it when it's funny, and that's the joy of this show. Really, is like you're willing to push into, this is just nebulous sci-fi at this point, but we're here.
Yeah, it's like the sci-fi concepts are correct when they want it to be, and then they ignore it when they want to ignore it for the comedy.
Yeah, and kind of my point about which scanner exactly. They have this handheld thing that Crichton holds a lot that is like, oh, this thing is saying that this passageway is very unstable and all this sort of stuff. And they did actually do a good job in the Back to Earth special of making fun of that, but then also using it and just being like, yeah, we're going to keep going with it. Because in that they go back to Earth and Red Dwarf is a show, and so they're there, as their characters, and there's a salesperson who's talking about just like, oh yeah, don't you just love it? They've got this thing like it can scan anything and it'll give you any information you need to know, and then they use it to say that person is an idiot. The scanner says he's an idiot. And so, it is again a bit of hand wavy, timey wimey, so on and so forth. But it's definitely one of the things that I've always kind of liked about Red Dwarf is just how loosey goosey they can be, as long as it works. And it's kind of difficult to explain to someone that hasn't watched the show, which is a bit of a problem since that's what we're doing. But it definitely is one of those things that if you aren't a fan of the show and you're not watching it, you're going to be listening to everything we've just said and go like, how can you follow anything that's happening in this show? But yeah, anyone that's sat down and like gone through the show, you're just like, yeah, nope, that tracks. You're absolutely happy to go along with it.
Yeah, it works. And because the characters are so great, and you just want to spend more time with the characters. So, whatever they say about the science, it's like, yeah, that's whatever you say. And then I did want to jump back a little bit to like Crichton in this episode, and also that. Because, I asked you, but I didn't really give my answer about, Kachansky as a whole and her joining the cast of this show, where I really liked Chloe Arnett. I really liked Kachansky as a character throughout these next two series. I think that she added, a different dynamic. But the one thing that I didn't like, and I think it works in this episode, but I think they drew it out way too long, is how Crichton reacts towards Kachansky. And, he becomes this extra neurotic that all of a sudden Lister is going to like Kachansky better than him. And he becomes, a very anxiety-ridden, and he develops this bubbling hatred towards Kachansky because he thinks that she's going to steal Lister away from him. And I never liked that aspect of his character across the next two series. But, I did like Kachansky as a whole and as a character. And I think it worked okay in this episode, but I think they stretched it out way too much.
I do think that it worked only because with Rimmer gone, there needed to be two characters that were butting heads enough that it would cause problems, but also cause misunderstandings or conversation to happen, like the full sitcom stuff that had to happen, and it couldn't be Lister and Kachansky, like, because they had their own will they won't they sort of get back together type thing.
Yeah, they definitely needed the Kachansky and Lister definitely needed to have that like that relationship arc where Kachansky initially doesn't like Lister, but she grows to appreciate him the more time they spend together.
Yeah, it's a different Dave, but yeah, and especially I think there's an episode later in the season called Duck Soup, and yeah, it's like Crichton just like, what about the way you look at him? Like he's a pot of cottage cheese with pineapple chunks in. And, it's something that there needed to be those two antagonistic characters, and they made the most sense. And Crichton, as the series had progressed, like he obviously was very thankful to Lister for helping him break his programming, and he had become the mother of the ship. So in terms of how it ended up where it is and how whiny he was with that, and the time it took for him to sort of accept Katansky, that I was perfectly fine with it because to me it made sense. However, I fully understand that it could be very grating. Like if it could absolutely hit the wrong way. He does have a very high pitch whine at times, especially in this episode. I used to be able to go as high pitch as he does for the "you're lying" bit, but I can't anymore.
You're lying.
I'll be on my own again, just like I was as a Nova 5. And that actually is something that with the Nova 5, we knew about them because that's where he was when we first met him. However, if you haven't read the Red Dwarf books, you don't actually know why they ended up where they did. So do you know how Crichton killed the crew and how he ended up being where he was when they found him?
I do, but only because they reference it in the Wikipedia article for this episode. That's I kind of have open for reference points.
Yeah, because that was something that cause I read. I think I read the books and I listened to the audio books for was it Infinity Welcome to Careful Drivers, and I can't remember the other one off the top of my head.
Backwards.
Yeah, backwards. And it was Chris Barry actually read the audiobooks for that. So you got Chris Barry doing his impression of all of the characters. It's definitely fun that they actually had that because it's not something that's ever mentioned again, and it's.
And for those listening, it's he put water on the computers of Nova 5 trying to clean them and ended up shorting them out and causing the crash.
Yeah. He believed that they needed a proper clean, so he put warm soapy water in all of the computers, including the nav, which is what then caused the crash. The SS Augustus. No idea. That's not mentioned anywhere.
Although it is kind of funny looking at it from a 2024 perspective, because back in 1997, computers would they would be fried if they came into contact with water. But nowadays, computers and computing tend to be a lot more water resistant.
Yeah, and you would expect as well that in this would be like by the time Crichton was there, because Lister was left to the Eggman's arms in 2155. So Crichton was several years after he went into stasis and then went into deep space. So Crichton would have been somewhere around 2200. You would think that computers would have reached the point of being, if not waterproof, then at least very water resistant.
Either that or they would have other cleaning products that wouldn't be water based.
But that doesn't work as a joke. That's
and then like one other bit of trivia that I read that I thought was, I saw it in the credits and I was like, because did you notice who plays Baby Lister?
Yep, it is Danny John Jules' son.
Nephew. Well, according to IMDb, it's his nephew.
Yeah, no, sorry, it was his nephew. His son played someone else at some other point in the show, I think.
Yeah, and the trivia also mentioned that they had cast a different baby, but Danny John Jules thought that and possibly the other actors thought that the skin tone didn't really match Craig Charles very well, but his nephew did, and so he recommended his nephew to stand in, and that's who they ended up using.
Yeah, and that and it makes sense. I mean, you absolutely would buy that baby is baby Lister. So yeah, it is interesting. Again, you can tell this show, even though at this point in time, they clearly had money in the budget for the special effects and things like that. They're still doing things the way that they did even back in series 1, where it's just like, we need something that works, like anything. Like, we gotta, like, this thing isn't working out, quick. What's the quickest, cheapest way we can fix this? Yeah, then George's being like, I know, baby.
Yeah, and then that's pretty much all I have for this episode. Did you have anything else for Ouroboros, or well, other than the fact that do you happen to know, is that like the British pronunciation of Ouroboros, or did they just mispronounce it for the joke?
They obviously were saying Ouroboros at the beginning, because the people at the English Sound had no idea what it was, and so obviously that is the joke that he says, like, he must have been thicker than a ticket tout wad, which I don't know if that translates over here in America. So, like, I'm assuming through context clues you can probably put it together. Do you know what a ticket tout wad would be referring to?
No idea.
Okay, so a ticket tout is someone who will be scalping tickets at an event. So like someone who maybe goes to football matches and will buy up the tickets and then sell them outside the venue at inflated prices. And so the wad being the wad of cash he has after he's done that. So like that's what that's referring to. And then obviously Ouroboros is the way that it would have been pronounced in England. Like, Ouroboros is how you would say that word. But
unless I'm just mispronouncing it myself, but I've always I always thought that it was pronounced Ouroboros.
Well, that's the thing. It is, but in the show, it's spelled differently. Like if you actually look at the name of the batteries, it is spelled with a U in it, whereas I don't believe that Ouroboros is not spelled with a U. I think it is Ouroboros. I may be incorrect with that, but I think that they are technically two different spellings, which would be a way of getting around it. But can have a quick look. I am incorrect. It is actually that. But I've only ever seen it written down like for the symbol without the U. But again, that could have just been someone spelled it incorrectly when they wrote it down. So has there ever been something? I'm sure we can go online and go to YouTube and get one of those, like, how do you pronounce this word? And you get the fancy person saying it slowly several times.
Well, I mean, let me go to Google, and I don't think the microphone will pick it up, but let me see here.
Ouroboros.
Yeah, American pronunciation is Ouroboros.
Okay.
And British pronunciation
Ouroboros
is apparently Ouroboros, which that sounds weird to me.
That sounds wrong. I'll be honest with you. That does not sound correct. Now, I do know that it can be spelled with a U at the end. So instead of Ross, it's Russ. But yeah, the fact that it would be that doesn't work.
I mean,
that sounds more like it. But obviously, for this episode, having gone round in circles, much like this episode, the Ouroboros is only in there with that pronunciation so that Lister can make the connection. And also quite likely that's just how Robert Llewellyn said it on the day. You know, like it was probably no one actually bothered to look up how you pronounce it. It was just, you're the one that gets to say this line, and we're just going to go based on that. So,
Or that's how Grant and Naylor thought it was pronounced.
Yeah, probably. Or they didn't care enough to correct them.
Yeah, and it's not like they can go to Google Translate and
Yeah,
look
not
it
back
up
then.
at 97. But I think that wraps up this episode. I'm sure we could go around and round forever in a literal snaking in its own tail. But I think we've talked enough about this episode. But thank you so much for joining me and talking about Red Dwarf for a while. But and for people listening that's haven't heard your other work, why don't you take a moment and let people know where else you can be found online? Yeah,
sure. So the other main online presence I have is I am the main host of the Blokebusters podcast, part of the Rabbit Hole Podcast Network now. And it's a podcast where I talk about film, TV, occasionally other random stuff with used to be a regular host, and now it's just a regular who's who of random people. Several fun things. You've been on for several things there. One of my most enjoyable recent things that I've done a couple of years ago now. But speaking of sci-fi, I watched the original Star Wars trilogy for the first time recently, after I realized that I had seen every other Star Wars film except the original trilogy. So I went back and did that with some people, and then after doing all three, I had all three guests back, and we covered the Star Wars Holiday Special as to close it out. So yeah, that was a lot of fun, and I think people will get a kick out of that, especially if you enjoy Red Dwarf and Doctor Who. I think you'll enjoy listening to that. But yeah, that is my main online presence. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm not the best at posting, I will freely admit. Mostly because I have a lot going on and much less free time than I used to. But if you want to reach out, say hi, I'll happily talk back. And as always, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me on social media everywhere at Bubbawheat. These days I am most active on Threads, which I am actually enjoying quite a bit. It feels a lot like 2007 Twitter, or 2009 Twitter, where whenever it was, it kind of started out there. Yeah. You can find me these days on there. But if you search Bubbawheat, I have laid my claim on the vast majority of the social medias, and if you send me a message, I will most likely get the notification, and as long as you're saying something nice, I will probably reply to you. And if you give me a follow, I will follow you back. And if you want to follow the show, we also have a Facebook group. It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group on Facebook, and you can join that and discuss episodes as they come out. It's also, very welcome to have discussions about anything time loop related there, including memes and anything else there. It's all welcome. And until next time, smoke me a kipper, and I will regenerate before breakfast next week.